Welcome to the fifth and final installment of building a platformer game with Game Salad. In this installment, we're going to finish off the third level completely by adding the laser guns and by adding the teleporters. And then to finish off the whole tutorial, we're going to add a splash screen and finish the game up. So let's get right into it. The laser guns are actually going to be a combination of three different actors. There's going to be an actor for the base of the laser gun. There's going to be an actor for the laser gun itself. And then, of course, there's going to be an actor for the laser that is shot out of the gun. So let's start with the base actor. Under Images, there's an actor called Gun Base. Or there's an image called Gun Base. Let's drag that up and make it an actor right now. Just going to drag that in, let it go. That becomes Gun Base Actor. I'm going to turn the physics off to that because it's not ever going to be affected by the physics engine in the game. Let's shut all that off. It's not going to be movable. These are going to be stationary guns. Once they're in the game, they're not going to be movable. But when you're placing them, you'll be able to rotate the actual gun actor itself to any direction, and that will be the direction in which it shoots once the game is being played. This gun base doesn't get any behaviors. It really doesn't do anything in the game. It's just scenery. To make the laser gun make sense, this is what's going to look like it's attaching it to the floor or the wall or the ceiling or wherever you happen to want to place your gun at. So there's no behaviors in this. That's a nice simple actor, just scenery alone. Let's add the gun. I'm also going to turn all its physics off. And it's not movable. In the gun actor, we're going to need to add a couple actor level attributes to this. The first one is going to be real. And I'm going to call that rate of fire. And that's going to be the number of seconds it waits in between laser beam fire. We need another real attribute. We're going to call this one distance from player. You might recall when we set up the robot, we needed to keep track of its distance from the player to know when it would play its sound. Same thing with this laser gun. We don't want all the laser gun sounds firing at the same time, even when you don't see them on screen. Before we can finish this with its behaviors, we need to add the actual laser actor for the laser beam coming out of it. So let's add that actor. There's no actual graphic provided for that. You don't need one. We're just going to use a base actor. It's going to be a red rectangle. So I just added a new actor. I'm going to turn most of its physics off. It's not going to have any density, any friction, or any bounciness, but it does need to be movable because the laser beam will actually be moving across the screen. I'm going to change its color to red. Seems like a good color for a bad laser beam that's going to cause you damage. We want to change the size of this to 30 pixels wide by 4 pixels high. So that's going to make it a horizontal rectangle. Now there's one last thing we need to do to the attributes here. Remember, for the robot, we set up this tag called bad. We also want to put the laser beam in the bad tag. So I'm going to drag this new actor. And let's rename that while we're here. I'm going to call it laser. So now I've called it laser, and we're going to drag that also into the bad tag. So that will now be tagged as bad along with this mean droid. I can go right back to its editor from this tags window by just double clicking this laser actor. And it takes me right back to its editor. For the behaviors for this laser beam, there's really not much to do for it. We want to move it on screen once it's spawned, and the laser gun is actually going to be spawning it. So once it's spawned, we want to move it. And I just want to move it at a speed fairly quickly. So I'm going to say 500. And then all the rest of this can stay defaults, 0, actor, and additive. You don't need to make any changes to that. This is just going to set up its speed of movement. And we also need to watch if it comes in contact with the walls or anything else in the game. I want the beam itself to disappear. So we need to create a rule that says when this actor overlaps or collides with any actor tagged as solid, we just want the beam to be destroyed, to disappear off the screen. Let's go back to the laser gun itself. There's the gun actor. I'm going to double click that and let's set up its behaviors right now. The first behavior we need to set up is a constrain attribute, and this is going to check the distance between the gun and the player at all times to know if it should play its sound or not, that we just set up distance from player right there. So we want to constrain gun distance from player to that same equation that we used in the droids. And that was, we want to check the magnitude, which that ends up meaning the distance between these two actors. I need a second paren. I want to check the gun's position, x, minus the game, player x, and we need to close that paren, comma, do a new paren, and check the game, position, gun, position, y, minus game, player y, and then close that paren. I want to drag in a timer behavior, and we're going to say every, and instead of 5 seconds, we're going to use this value right here, rate of fire. So each gun you put in the game can have its own rate of fire. And you'll see we'll be changing these rates of fire on the different guns that we place in level 3. So every gun, rate of fire, and that is in seconds. So like I said, if you want your gun to fire every 1 second, you would put in 1 for your rate of fire. If you wanted the gun to fire every 5 seconds, you would put in 5 for rate of fire. We're going to want to run this timer to completion because there's going to be several different behaviors in here that happen every time the gun fires. The first thing we want to add is a rule, and make sure you add these into the timer or else they won't work right. And this rule is going to play the sound if the player is close enough. So if the attribute gun distance from player, if that's less than 400 pixels, so I'm going to say less than 400, then I want to play the sound. If the player is more than 400 pixels away, this gun will still fire, but it just won't play the sound. So I want to play sound, drag that into this rule, and say play sound, laser. I'm going to close this one up now. We need to add one more event, which is actually going to spawn the laser beam out of the gun. And that is a spawn actor. Again, that goes in the timer because this timer is going to play the sound and spawn the actor every X number of seconds, depending on what you have set up. So we want to spawn the actor, laser that we just set up, and all of the rest of this can stay as default. You don't have to worry about any of it. So I'm going to close this up and show you how to place these on screen. Scroll up to where our player is. Now just as a test, to test this gun out, I'm going to drop it in right here and place it in front of the player. And press play. Let's just see what happens and see what's working right and if anything is not working right. Okay, well, it's firing a laser beam continuously, and that's because I didn't set up this specific instance's rate of fire. So let's fix that. In this gun that we just dragged in, you double click that, just like when we were setting up the robots or when we're setting up the movable platforms. And I want to set its rate of fire, just for the sake of argument, let's say 1 right now. So it should fire only once every second. Now let's preview that again. Jump to level 3. So it's firing, and you can see it's not a continuous rate of fire now, which is perfect. That's what we want. But the laser beam is spawning in front of this actor, and we don't want that. Let's go back to that laser gun actor. And we do need to make one change in here. In the spawn actor, layer order, I want to spawn in back of actor. Now it'll spawn behind the laser gun, so you won't see it coming out of the front like that. You won't see it until it's outside of the gun, right here. I also noticed that the size of that we hadn't adjusted yet, so let's adjust the size of that actor. It was quite large. I just want it to be 64 by 30 pixels. And then also, let's check the size of the gun base that we set up. I want the size of that to be 40 by 40 pixels. Now let's actually get this gun set up properly on screen, and you can see how it'll adjust around and end up looking really nice. I'm going to delete that. Let's drag in a gun base. Now when I let that go, you'll see it's kind of pointing up. But I want these guns to be on the ceiling. I'm going to double click it, and I want to change its rotation. So I want to rotate it 180 degrees. Now you'll see it's pointing down, and I can go ahead and place it kind of up on the ceiling like that. So there it is. Now we want to place the gun as well. I'm going to select a new gun, drag it in here, and now you'll see it's a lot smaller. That's more in line with the sizing of the player. That other gun was gigantic, would have been good maybe on a tank or some sort of huge spaceship. Now when you're placing this gun itself, remember this point right here that I'm pointing to is the center of the actor. And I want it to seem like it's rotating from this part of the gun base so the scenery works correctly. So I'm just going to click right in the center and drag it right to about where that circle was. Now when I deselect, you'll see the gun is on top of the base. I don't want that. So I'm going to go to Scene, Layers. In the background, all we want to do is change gun base, put that above gun. Now you'll see the gun base is above the gun, and the gun's a little bit off. I'm going to use my arrow keys on the keyboard just to move it down. Looks like 1 pixel might be enough. Maybe 2. Make sure you have the gun. Move it down another pixel. And now it looks like the center of the gun is exactly in this center rotating gear item of the base. And remember, in the gun, we have to set up its rate of fire. And I want to make this gun's rate of fire every 2 seconds. Let's check that out. I'm going to press Preview. And I jumped up, moved over and jumped up so we could see it since it's up on the ceiling. And you'll see it's firing a little bit slower than the previous gun we had set up. And also now the laser beam is spawning behind it, so it looks like it comes out of the gun instead of overlapping it the whole time. Now let me show you the cool thing about these guns. When we go back here, it doesn't always have to shoot perfectly horizontally like that. When we select this gun now, I'm going to drag its rotation handle, which is this circle right here. You could also rotate numerically, remember, like I did the base. But if you want to do this visually, you can select this. And now when I rotate the gun, it rotates from its center point, which is that center point of the gear of the base. So I could take this gun now and rotate it in any direction I want. Let's say I wanted it to shoot directly downward. I rotated it so it's pointing down. Now when I preview, it shoots down. And as you recall, we set up a behavior in the laser beam when it touches something solid, the laser beam goes away. So it's hitting the floor and the laser beam gets destroyed. So you can have an endless variety of laser guns in your game now, pointing in any direction, shooting at any speed, but they're all going to be made from these two actors. So let's actually set this up like I wanted in the game. And remember, I wanted to set two of these up on the ceiling so they shoot in an X pattern. So I'm going to take this one and rotate it this way a little bit. So when it shoots, it's going to shoot in that direction. Now let me make a copy of this gun. Oh, rotate it a little bit because I had the handle. I'm going to hold down Option and drag it now that I'm not touching the handle. Make a copy of it. I want to rotate this one so it'll shoot in this direction, and then we'll end up with that X action. I want to make a copy of this base. I'm going to drag it right about there. Now let's get this gun placed again right in the center so it seems to rotate from the correct point. And let's preview this. Now I have two guns shooting in an X fashion that the player is going to have to figure out how to get through quickly and not get hit. And that seems like a fairly gentle introduction to laser guns here on level 3. They're not shooting too fast. It's certainly not going to be too difficult to get through there, but it lets the player know there's a new danger and you could certainly be killed by these. So let's run through there. I got hit, but over here, as you might recall from the level run through, we put a health. So the player can quickly get healed without worrying too much about finishing the rest of the level. So let's stop this. And what we'll do now is we'll go through the level and place the other laser guns wherever they need to go, and then we can move on to the teleporters. So as I had said, we want another laser gun down here, essentially protecting this double jump that you're going to need to move through the level. So let's add that. Just going to pick the same elements now that we have already existing. Want to rotate that around again. 180 degrees because it's going to be another one on the ceiling. Drag it up right about there. I just click this just to unhighlight that so I could see how it's placed on screen. That seems fine. Drag in the gun. Again, put its center point right about in that center rotating gear. That looks like it should be fine. And in this case, I do want it shooting directly horizontally underneath this pickup. So it's kind of protecting it. You'll have to jump up and get that, and you'll have to time that jump so you don't get hit by the laser beam. Let's set up the rate of fire for this one. Whoops, I double-clicked the base. Don't want that. Make sure you double-click the gun. And then this gun's rate of fire, I'm going to make it twice as fast as the previous ones. So I want it to fire once every second. So it's going to fire more quickly. And that will also now let the player know that the laser guns can point in different directions and shoot at different rates of fire. Now I have one more laser gun to add to level 3 that's over here, shooting over these toxic waste pits. All the way over here. I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to drag the gun in first this time so we don't have to worry about that layering. I want it to shoot in this direction over these platforms, so I just rotated it around. Let's drag in the gun base. Put it right about there. Whoops, jumped down on me. I'm going to drag it back up. Put it right there. Now we'll need to adjust the placement of the gun a little bit. I'm going to use my arrow keys again, just to move it around on a pixel basis. That looks about right. And let's set this gun's rate of fire at a much slower speed. So I'm going to set that to be once every 4 seconds. And what that's going to do is it's going to let the laser beam pass over all of these platforms and all of this lava, or all of this toxic waste, before another one shoots. So the player won't have to deal with 2 or 3 or 4 laser beams all at once over these platforms. They'll just have one. Now later on, maybe on level 6 or level 10 or some point later in the game, you might want to set up a similar obstacle to this, but have this laser gun shooting much quicker. So it's a similar obstacle. The player's familiar with what they have to do, but it's ramped up at another level of difficulty because the lasers are going to become much faster at that point. So while this is a new obstacle for level 3, it's more difficult for the player. You can reuse this obstacle again, but make it more difficult in a later level. So the player has that familiarity with the obstacle, but yet it's still new and fresh because it's more difficult that time around. That completes the laser guns for level 3. They're all set up, they're all in place, they're good to go. So let's move on to the teleporters. The teleporter, just like the laser gun down here, is going to be a combination of multiple actors to get the whole thing to look and act properly. So let's first add the base, literally the base of the teleporter. In the images, there's a graphic called teleporter. Let's drag that up in here and make an actor out of that. Double click it, and we want to turn all its physics properties off, just like most other actors so far in this game. Turn off movable. Let's check its size. 64 by 16 is correct, so we'll leave that alone. There are going to be a couple behaviors we add over here, but before we add those, we need to add a couple more actors. And you'll see why after we get those added in there. I'm going to come back down here by the teleporter and drag in this teleport beam actor from the images. Drag that in right there and let it go. It's already named teleport beam. Let's go into that as well. Turn the physics for that off. I want to check its size also. 64 by 64 is good. I want to change the color of it. So first I'm going to pick like a purple color. There we go. And I want to change the opacity of that, or the alpha setting, to 0.5. So it's a little bit transparent. The reason I chose purple was just so it looks like it matches with the teleporter, because the teleporter looks like it has a purple pad. So to keep some consistency here in the graphics, I wanted the beam to be purple as well. This beam is going to be just like the base of this gun. It's purely a scenery element, so it's not going to have any behaviors or anything going on. It's just going to be some scenery above the teleporter. So it kind of looks cool and looks like the teleporter is projecting a beam, so when you land on it, you will teleport to a new location. And we need to add one more decorative element or one more scenery element to this teleporter to make it look cool and make it look interesting to the player. I'm going to add some particle effect bubbles, or whatever you want to call it, particle effect particles rising up from the platform into space. And the reason I said bubbles is because I'm going to use this bubble particle as a base actor and just make some changes to it. So let's go find that in our list of actors. Toxic particles. I'm going to copy that by holding down Option and dragging it. And I'm going to call this teleport particles. Let's make some changes to that to make it look like it belongs to the teleporter. The first thing I want to do is eliminate this change attribute, because we're never actually going to be placing these particles ourselves in the game. I don't need to give them any kind of transparency or hide them from the player or anything like that. And I'll show you why in just a second. So let's delete that first. And I'm going to leave all of the particle effect settings that we used for the bubbles from the toxic waste exactly like they are here. The only thing I want to change is the color of these. I'm going to make that purple as well, since the rest of the elements for the transporter are purple. So this will look like purple particles rising from the transporter. One other thing we need to do under the color is make that 0, so this main actor never shows up in the game. You'll just see the particles alone. Now how we're going to make those particles and this beam show up is we're going to spawn them right from the teleporter. So I want to go to the behaviors, drag in a spawn actor attribute. The first thing I want to spawn is the teleport beam. So I'm going to choose that, and then I want to spawn that. Remember how actors spawn at the center point of the actor from which they're spawning? So I want to move that up so the base of the beam looks like it's spawning here at the top of this platform. So to do that, I need to change its position. This is its Y position, up and down. This is its X position, left and right. I want to change its Y position to 40. Now we want to spawn another actor. We want to spawn those particles as well. So I copied that spawn behavior. And I want to also spawn the teleport particles. I don't need to offset those by much. I'm just going to offset those by 8. From the center here, they should rise up right here to the top of the base again. And let's place one of these in the game and see what we get. I'm going to go up by the player. In fact, let me move the player over here away from the gun. So let me drag in this teleport base, and I'll put it right here, just for testing purposes. And now what should happen when this single actor is placed, because its behaviors spawn a beam and spawn particles, will automatically get those scenery effects as well. So let's see what happens. Let me jump so we can see that a little better. But you can see now we're getting a beam. It's above the platform. It's kind of a purple tint here. And these particles are spawning as well out of the top of this platform. So by building this one actor right here with a couple spawn behaviors, we have a whole cool looking piece of scenery here added all at once. Now there's one final actor we're going to need to add to make the teleporter actually work correctly. Let me delete this one we placed on screen. And I'm going to move the player now to where the first teleporter is actually going to be in the game, so we can get those placed, working correctly, and be able to test them. It's right down here. It's going to be right here. We're going to place, remember, the first teleporter here, and then you're going to teleport to the other side of the wall right there. Let's add that other actor, the final actor we'll need to complete this teleporter. It's just going to be a blank or empty trigger actor. So I'm going to call it teleport trigger. Let's double click that. Turn all this off. Because again, it's just a trigger. You're not even going to see it in the game. It's just going to be an invisible element that when the player touches it, it's going to let the player know to teleport from one location to another. We do need to add a couple actor level attributes here to this trigger. They're both going to be real attributes. In the first one, it's going to be teleport X. And we're going to add another real, and that's going to be teleport Y. And these are literally going to be the on-screen coordinates that the player will teleport to when it touches this trigger. We need to add one behavior over here to control that. I'm going to add a rule, and this is going to watch for when this trigger overlaps or collides with the player. It's going to change a couple game level attributes for us. So let's drag in a couple change attributes. There's one. And what we're going to change the game teleport X that we set up at the very beginning of this tutorial to this teleport triggers teleport X. Let me copy this and set the same thing up for the Y location. So game teleport Y and self teleport Y. And these two game level attributes will move the player to this new location, the new location of the teleporter in the game. To do that, we need to edit some rules within the player. So let's go back to the player's actor, and now we'll add a new rule to this player. And this rule is going to handle the teleportation. I'm going to drag a rule up to the top here. And what we want this rule to check for is if this player overlaps or collides with the teleport trigger we just set up. If that happens, we want to play a sound. Let's drag in a play sound behavior. We want to play the sound, teleport, and then we want this actor to fade away so it looks like it's kind of transporting, and then on the other transporter you'll fade back in again. So to get this actor to fade away, I need to add an interpolate behavior right under the sound, and it's going to interpolate the player's alpha to 0. And I want that to last 1 second, so I'm going to leave that alone as the default. Now within this first rule, within this first teleport me rule, we need to add another rule right under this interpolate. I'm going to come down, drag a new rule in there, and what this rule is going to watch for, it's going to watch for when the player's alpha actually equals 0. That means that the player has touched this trigger and faded away. And only after that player has faded away should it move to its new location. And this new rule is actually going to move it to its new location. So when the attribute player color alpha equals 0, then we want to move its location. So I want to do a change attribute, and I want to change the player's position X to this game level teleport X, which we just set the value of in teleport trigger. And I also want to change the player's Y position. So let's do that. Player position Y. I want to change that to the game level teleport Y. I'm going to close both of those up. Now, the player is still transparent because its alpha is 0. So it's going to move the player to this new XY location. The player won't see it yet because the actor is transparent. So now what we're going to do is we're going to fade the actor back in to 100% alpha channel so you can see it. And then we're also going to play the new sound, and the player will be at a new location within the level. So I'm going to copy this play sound behavior right down here. And I want to play the sound teleport to. I'm also going to copy this interpolate behavior. This time I want to interpolate to 1. So it will go from 0 to 1 in 1 second. But now it's going to be at this new location we've moved it to when it was invisible, and the person playing the game didn't know it. It'll just happen on screen. It'll seem like the actor teleported from one position to another. So let's test that out, and I'll show you how to actually set up and make this teleporter work. Teleporters work in combinations of 2. They don't really have to, it just visually makes sense that way. So for this first teleporter, I'm going to drag it in, put it right there. I'm going to make a copy of that and put it right here. So again, like I said on the walkthrough, I want these to be right next to each other so the player absolutely understands what just happened the first time they see a teleporter. They'll clearly realize I landed on this one, moved to a new position on screen, and reappeared. And then from then on, you don't have to be able to see the teleporters to really understand what happened. After the first one, the player will always remember that's a teleporter and I know what's going on. So let's preview this and see what happens. So now we have the teleporters. The beams are shooting up. The bubbles or teleport particles are rising up as well. Now when I land on this first one, nothing's going to happen yet because we haven't actually placed the trigger. So I'll land on it and nothing's going to happen. So let's get that trigger placed and we'll make this work properly. I'm going to drag this trigger actor in. I'm going to make it much smaller. It doesn't have to be anywhere near that size. In fact, it wouldn't work right if it was that big because the player would come into contact with it outside of the teleporter graphic. So I made it a little bit smaller but I left the height of it sticking up a little bit. So when the player lands on this platform, it's going to hit this trigger, and now we're going to tell this trigger to teleport the actor over to here. So if we double click this trigger that we just placed on screen, what we want to do is change this teleport X and teleport Y. And what you want to change that to is the XY location of this teleporter that you want your character to beam into. So I want to come to this teleporter from this one. I'm going to double click this and I see its X and Y position. I'm going to update this to 1312 just to make it even in 841. So back in that trigger, I'm going to double click that and make teleport X 1312, make teleport Y 841. And before we play test this, I want to make one change to the teleporter actor. I want to flag that or tag that as being solid. So if the player hits it or lands on top of it, it'll be solid. So now let's play test this. Now when I land on top of this platform teleporter, I should fade out and fade in on top of this new platform teleporter. And there you go. And now of course the player can continue on with the rest of the level. So let's place the second teleporter we're going to need on level 3. And the first half of that teleporter is going to be right here. And you'll see now you could have teleporters all over your level, and they're super simple to set up, just like the laser gun is. All you have to do is drag in this, drop it right there. I'm going to go put in the receiving teleporter. I wanted that to be right here, just before this toxic waste obstacle. So I'm going to drag in the receiving teleporter right there. Let it go. While I'm here, I'm going to check its XY and locations. Oops, position. I'm going to round that to 2,000, 237, and 392. Let's go back. Drag in the trigger for this starting teleporter. Right there, I'm going to drag that in, and of course it's big. Again, reduce it down. You do want to have it sticking up above the platform of the teleporter just a little bit. If I put it down here, the player would never come in contact with it, so the player would never teleport because they wouldn't touch it. So I just want it sticking up a little bit. And then within that actor, I'm going to change the teleport X 2237 and the teleport Y to 392. So that's basically it for level 3. I did notice we forgot to place one of the final laser gun here by the door. So let's do that really quickly. You should definitely be familiar with that by now. Certainly easy to do. I'm going to drag the gun in first. I'm going to rotate it around so it kind of points at an angle down at the door. Just leave that there for now and drag in the gun base. I want to rotate that again 180 degrees because I want it to be on the ceiling. I'm going to put it right about there. Drag the gun in place. I'm going to double click the gun. And we'll set up its rate of fire. I'm going to set that to be 1.5 seconds. So as you can see, it doesn't have to be 1 second or 2 seconds. It could be 1.5 seconds or half a second, 3/4 of a second if you used 0.75. And now it's going to be fairly difficult for the player to actually exit the level. Now that does complete level 3. That's all the new elements. We've added all the new laser guns. We added the additional moving platform, and we added all the teleporters. So we have a complete level 1, 2, and 3 of our game. The last thing we want to do is to set up a splash screen before level 1. To add that splash screen, I'm going to click the plus button, and it adds it here at the end. You can just drag it right over because you do want it to be your first scene. Drag it to the beginning. I'm going to name it Splash. Now let's double click that. Splash screen is going to mostly be made up of existing elements. So I'm going to drag in the space background first. Just place that over the splash. I'm going to add a few graphics just to make the splash screen a little bit more interesting. You could just put text on it, like the title of your game, and, play now, or press P to play, or click your button to play, whatever. I want to add a little scenery, just so the players are going to know maybe a little bit about the game before it even starts. I'm going to drag in the platforms as a floor. I want to put the player on there. Just going to drag the player in right about there. Let them go. I also want to add an enemy robot. I'm going to drop him right about there. None of these elements that we're adding are going to be playable or able to be interacted with by the player at all. I just want them to be scenery here on the splash screen. So what you want to do for that, for example, this player, you want to double click that and do the click the lock to edit the behaviors of this actor. So when those are unlocked, I'm literally going to just delete all of the behaviors from this player, because I don't want this player to be active on the splash screen. I just want it to sit there like a graphic. So I deleted all the behaviors from the player. I'm going to do the same thing from the mean droid. I'm going to unlock that. I'm just going to delete all of these once I get them all closed and I can see them on screen all at once. And delete all of those. So when I go back here and click preview, those will just sit there on screen now. They're just picture elements or scenery elements at this point. If I press my arrow keys, nothing happens. This isn't animating. You don't hear any sounds. So it's just scenery. So let's add a title to this. To add a title, we're going to need to add a new actor. I'm going to call that title. I'm going to double click that. And I want to make this actor itself invisible. So I'm going to make its alpha 0. And then I want to display text behavior. I'm going to drag display text in. And I want it to say, Danger Droids. You have a font menu here, a list of a few fonts. I'm going to choose Helvetica New. I'm going to set the size to 40. That's in pixels. And you could change the color here at the color picker. I'm going to leave ours white. So now when I place that on screen, I'm going to drag title. I'm going to start it right there in the center, just so I know it's centered right to left. but I want it to be at the top of the screen. I don't need to resize this actor at all because it's going to put that text on here just starting at this center point. So let's preview that. That's a little high, correct words, but it's too high on screen for me. So I want to pull that down. Didn't realize that was outside of my camera crop here. Keep that in mind when you're setting up your screens. This outside white box is the crop of the camera. Now I want to do one more. So I'm going to copy title just so I don't have to reset all those physics and things. I'm going to call this one play. In the display text, I want it to say press P to play. I'm going to reduce the size a little bit so the title gets some more focus over the subtitle or the play button. So I'm going to reduce that to 20 pixels. And then we need to add a rule to this one. And what this rule is going to say, it's going to watch for the keyboard. And if the key P is pressed down, it's going to go ahead and start the game. And it's going to start the game by going to the next scene. Change scene to the next scene. You could specifically pick a scene if you wanted to, but because I have the splash screen already set before level 1, I'm just going to go ahead and go to the next scene. So let's place that bit of text on screen. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line it in the center like that and just move it up a little bit. Let's see how that looks. So now we have Danger Droids, press P to play, and we have some scenery just for fun. Now when I press P, it should go ahead and go to the first scene, and then the player can start the game. Now there's one last edit that needs to be made to the player to really finish this game off, and it's just a little thing I noticed while testing the game. Sometimes when the player would land on the floor, there was a bug where things weren't getting reset properly. So what you have to do is force things to reset. What I'm going to do is go into the player, and we're going to add a timer. I'm going to drag in this timer behavior. I want to put it right underneath land on the ground. And that land on the ground is what is currently resetting the jumping and the jump count behaviors of the player. And I'm going to force the game to continually check if you're on the ground. So I'm going to say every 1 second, run this to completion. Let's title this Force Check Ground. And all we have to do to set up this force check is take this land on the ground, make a copy of it, and put it in here. And now what this is going to do is it's going to check for you landing on the ground whenever you collide with a solid object. And that should do it. But for whatever reason, sometimes it was missing that check. So now in addition to that normal check, every 1 second I'm going to force the game to recheck to see if you're on the ground. And if you are on the ground, it's going to reset these things just like they should be. Every once in a while playtesting, my jumps wouldn't reset properly. So by forcing this to check every 1 second, it's going to reset those jumps correctly. And that's it. That completes the platformer tutorial using GameSalad for GameDevTutsPlus.com. I know we covered a lot of ground in these tutorials. There's really a lot of things that we've done and a lot of things that could be used in other game types besides platformers. So I hope you got a lot out of this. I hope you found it helpful. Definitely download the source files because you really have the beginning of a whole platformer game right there. You could go ahead and go through and make additional levels, add additional characters or actors, and do all sorts of cool stuff with what you've learned here so far. So again, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got a lot out of it. And I hope to be back with some more tutorials for GameDevTutsPlus.com. Thanks for watching.